Martina Secchi is head of townscape assessment at Bidwells. Bidwells are experts in the science and technology sector in the UK. And 50 years ago, in the early 70s, they created Cambridge Science Park with Trinity College. Bidwells have also produced a report called Radical Capital, which looks at reimagining the UK economy and how the Oxford-Cambridge arc can drive it. Can you tell me more about that?
As we know, cities like particularly Cambridge and Oxford are very historical, they're very valued, they're very sensitive. So proposing the type of development that will bring forward these capitals could create an arm, which in my case, the way I look at it, could be a visual arm, could be a townscape arm, and so on. But the way this report helps is that it kind of gives that reassurance that although there might be some arm, there is a need for expansion, a need for growth in these cities. And in a way, all of these social, economical aspect could outweigh some of the harm. I don't like the word mitigating because it's like comparing apple with pears. I mean, we cannot really say that bringing so many jobs will mitigate a visual issue, but I am very open to the idea of outweighing some of the harm, because what we really want is any city to grow. We want it to grow sustainably, and that's the important part of this report, is about looking at how sustainably these areas, this city can grow. So I think that becomes a very much of a positive that outweighs what the harm would be. Now, it's very hard to accept this because it requires a very holistic view of a project. So not focusing on a specific discipline, not focusing on specific things, but looking very holistically at what a project brings to an area, to a city, to a place, and accept that although some things might not be perfect, or could cause some negative impact, there is a lot of positive that comes with the project that needs to be valued, needs to be balanced in the grand scheme of things. Otherwise, we'll get stuck. We'll really get stuck. I feel like otherwise we're never going to progress. Cities will get stuck in the way they are, and there are brilliant examples of great architecture integrated with the historic city. So why stopping that just because of a single arm? And I'm not the popular person usually in a room. I mean, I do point to the arm a lot. I mean, I'm not as nice when it comes to point out that there is some issues, because that needs to be done, because that needs to be considered and things needs to be designed appropriately to a place. But I think it's absolutely fundamental that holistically we look at what a project will bring. And what this report does is really creates that sort of baseline where I feel confident that all of these positives will happen, because we know that a lot of the interested parties, a lot of the stakeholders wants to bring a lot of positive economical and social input into the arc.
At NNA, of course, we're always keen to talk about the Golden Triangle, London, Oxford and Cambridge. And does London not play a part in the clustering of the knowledge economy sector's success in the region?
London itself is a great example of how you integrate all of these positive in an historic city. I mean, it has great history, great architecture, great urban design, and nonetheless, it found a way to actually integrate a lot of new landmarks, new experiments and so on, and it carries on doing that. So it's quite progressive. And so it is some kind of the focal point where the arc then expands from, I think, because India is about expanding what London has done so well for so many years in bringing in a lot of opportunities, a lot of tech, a lot of labs and so on, maybe finance a bit more, but it's about expanding that influence of London to a much bigger area. And really it is about learning from London, I think, because London has, as I said, we've seen it has been done successfully. I mean, maybe not always, but generally successfully, in terms of integrating new technology, integrating the need and the growth of a city within an historic city. So now it's about expanding that thought to the wider landscape, to the wider city, so that everywhere there'll be that sustainable growth that we've seen happening there. So I think there is a lot to be said about London being the sort of focal point of the arc, and then the arc expanding out of London in terms of taking examples and so on. So I absolutely don't disagree. I think we need to start from there and take examples and actually bring it to the rest. And indeed, I've started working on the ARC, of course, in terms of tall buildings, that example, and so on. So those type of projects, lab buildings, those type of projects that sort of reflects what we talked about in the report. But I'm doing some in London as well. And it's very interesting to see the difference in how we approach that type of development in London, in Cambridge, in Oxford. There is a very different approach from the local authority. There is a different approach from an evidence base. So it's going back to what happens in London. And I've done London after I did things in the ARC, and it was I don't want to say it was easier. It never is easy, but you see how when a city is open and ready for that kind of development, you see how everything sort of fits into places a lot easier from a project perspective as well, in terms of bringing that kind of innovation and that kind of drive. So yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think the triangle is still there, and I think it's about the idea of expanding it to a big landscape, really.
Can you tell me a bit about the key projects you're working on at the moment?
The two projects that I feel like particularly, well, they took my whole life for a long time recently, but I feel they're particularly interesting. And I talked about it quite a lot in general, because they are such landmarks in both cities. So I've done a tall building in Cambridge, Hills Road, in an area called Betjeman House, which is right next to the Botanic Garden. Now, a tall building in Cambridge is anything over 6 stories. This one was a lot more. If I'm going from memory, it was 9 stories, the taller element. And in Cambridge, that's a lot, because Cambridge is a low-lying city, very historical. And for those that don't know, the Botanic Garden is very close to the center. So this building was effectively next to the Botanic Garden, close to the center, close to the train station area, which is an area of regeneration where height is actually pushing at the moment. So this was a tall building in Cambridge, a big volume in a very sensitive area. And then I had this other tall building, which was, again, from memory, 29 stories, something between 29 and 32 stories in Milton Keynes. So, which will be the tallest building in Milton Keynes after the Hotel Latour, which is just finished. And this is Saxon Court. So on Saxon Gate. So that's sort of on a gateway into Milton Keynes, fairly central, but on the edge. And it will be the tallest element. It will be quite a landmark in Milton Keynes, because even Milton Keynes, although higher in terms of height than Cambridge, is quite uniform at the moment. So these will actually break that kind of uniformity with the Hotel Latour. And of course, the dome creates that very, very particular shape on the skyline. So two very different experience. And if you look at Cambridge, where it's the site where the Betjeman House development will be is a brownfield site. So ticks a lot of boxes, reusing a brownfield site because it's already developed. The buildings, it's in conservation area, but one of the buildings there, there is a couple of listed buildings, and one is on the contrary, actually identified as a negative landmark. So, there is a lot that can be done in regenerating the area, also to regenerate the setting of the listed buildings, which at the moment is basically a car park and a bad building. There was a lot of resistance because of fear for height, fear for the impact. And the result was that I did have some adverse impact because of the location of the building, particularly because of the proximity to the Botanic Garden, which of course is a green space, has that sort of sense of openness because of the way Cambridge is. So a tall building can create that sort of sense of enclosure, that it's a bit against the current context. So there is an arm, there is a visual arm. But on the other hand, assuming, which I think it was, the building will be of high quality and therefore generate a certain architecture, which I never use the word beautiful because it's not in my technical allowance, but I think I do actually preach for high quality architecture leading to high aesthetic. I think is absolutely true. I mean, anything that is of high quality, it will lead to a high aesthetic. Then beautiful, I cannot really comment because something that I would like someone else want, but as long as it's a solid aesthetic, something that it will sustain the time, that it's nice, it works, it's sustainable, then it's something that will be positive for the local urban environment and therefore can mitigate some of the effects. So now in this case, I can use the word mitigation because I think you know, a good architecture will mitigate some of the effects. But then going back at what we said before, if we look at this, at the Radical Capital report and these 6 topics, the bigger picture is that this building will also bring a great deal of social economical positive matters. So, you know, generate work, bring new labs, bring new young people, new public space. I mean, it will generate a lot more than just a nice building. And holistically, if we look at all of these, then these could outweigh the negative impact of a building of a substantial mass and volume. But in Cambridge, the resistance is a lot because of the historical part of Cambridge, you know, the community of Cambridge being very, very strong. So it was a big challenge. While when you take that experience and you bring it to Milton Keynes, a new city with a very recent development, with an eye to the future since it was born, basically, the experience is completely different. The relationship with the local authority was a lot more flexible in the way they were very keen to, for example, explore the potential for a new skyline of Milton Keynes. So a part of my report was actually a very brief sort of analysis of what their skyline is, because they never really thought about it. They never really did anything like that. So they wanted to understand. I think for them it was the first stepping stone to actually start to programming what the skyline of Milton Keynes will be. So effectively that baseline area. And so the back and forward was a lot more flexible. They were more open. They were more engaging, and they accept the fact that although there might be some impact, and that is to be controlled. I mean, of course, we're not going over the top. I mean, who cares about any negative effects? I mean, there is a lot that I do, and the architect hates me for that, in sort of shaping, modeling the building so that the impact, even if adverse, it's controlled and we know what it is and we're not going over the top. So at the example, in the case of Milton Keynes, such tall building will be very visible from some of the footpaths from very far away in the country, because it's in a river valley. So as the topography rises, you'll see that. And you do question whether that's the thing that you want to see. So we need to be careful. I mean, things needs to be careful. And again, the idea of high quality design leading to a good architecture is fundamental in that case, because otherwise the risk is to create something that will not stand the test of time. So in Milton Keynes, completely different experience, and the positives, it was a lot less difficult to explain this holistic approach where you understand what the impacts will be, and there will be possibly some visual impacts, but they are more open to the idea of all the benefits that comes with the project, and how that would outweigh some of the impact, because they're looking at the future. They're doing what I feel London probably did before my time, before I started in this profession, but I feel like London probably did not have this fear of looking at the future and little by little building their townscape. Milton Keynes, in this little, because of course it's not comparable to London, but in this little context, I feel like it's probably doing the same thing by looking holistically of all of these benefits, while historic city, Cambridge, and very much Oxford as well, struggle to make that jump. And I understand that, because it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy, and it takes a degree of courage to actually trust the system and trust that it will bring all of these amazing things. But I think when things are done properly, and I come from a country where things are not done properly, so I can see, I know what the bed looks like, but when things are done properly, when the system is there, when the process is there, so there is a process of design, assessment, and consideration of all the aspects, then the good results are there. And these two projects, for example, show it in two very different cities. They show that I think it can be achievable. It can be done.
Now, I get the impression that there are big differences in the appetite for growth between Oxford and Cambridge. How do you find that shaping up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Cambridge is a very strange environment. It's sort of forward thinking and pulling back at the same time, but it's true, because there is a massive appetite. I mean, a lot of the projects I work on are commercial. There is a lot of laboratory, a lot of labs going in, which creates all sorts of difficulties because of flus and so on. So from an architectural and assessment perspective, they have their challenges. Oxford, it's a lot more complicated. Yeah, I think I've done a few, I'm doing actually at the moment a couple of projects in Oxford, and yeah, it's a lot more difficult to actually push for the same amount of innovation and the same amount of labs, but Cambridge is definitely going forward that way. So hopefully it will carry on.
Well, thank you very much for your comments, Martina. Very interesting.
Thank you. I hope it was useful.
Jolly good. Thank you.